On the battlefield, bleeding out after a grenade exploded at his feet. His SEAL brothers sprang into action, applying tourniquets and calling for an emergency evac. His injuries were catastrophic. It should have been the end of his story, but it wasn't. He would survive that night, only to face an even harder battle, one that would push him to the edge of sanity and force him to reinvent himself completely. And in doing so, he would become one of the most famous storytellers in the world. If you enjoy profound, historic, and timeless stories, this is the place for you. That's what we do here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. We release new stories every Sunday and Wednesday. John Allen grew up in Boston, surrounded by a family that seemed destined for success in journalism. His father, a celebrated journalist, once took home the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting, and his sister followed in their father's footsteps, becoming a very talented journalist in her own right. Though he grew up around words and headlines, John's early dreams had nothing to do with storytelling. As a kid, he had his sights set on baseball. Like many boys in Boston, John dreamed of playing for the Red Sox. He spent countless afternoons in the backyard playing catch, picturing himself stepping up to the plate at Fenway Park. But like most childhood dreams, that one eventually faded away. By high school, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. College, that was an option, but he struggled with direction and focus. He nearly flunked out and ended up spending a lot of time in the basement, feeling lost and unsure of what to do next. That's when something changed. For the first time in his life, John took a hard look at himself and realized that his situation was not anyone else's fault. It wasn't his parents' fault. It wasn't his school's fault. It was him. If he wanted to fix it, he'd have to take full responsibility. And he did. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, John decided he needed a challenge, a big one. He started looking into the military. It wasn't the idea of war that drew him in. It was the difficulty of the process. Becoming a Navy SEAL was one of the hardest things a person could attempt. The training was grueling and unforgiving. He wanted to see if he could do it. Becoming a Navy SEAL wasn't a short or easy journey. It took years to complete the training. Most who attempt it don't make it. There are two paths to becoming a SEAL, the enlisted route or the officer route. John, without much of a resume or prior experience, chose the enlisted path. It was the more competitive of the two. He found himself surrounded by former professional athletes, Olympians, and MMA fighters, many of whom didn't make it past the first few weeks. The crazy part is, a lot of these guys, absolute studs, washed out almost immediately, John recalled. The people you thought would crush it, like pro baseball players and college athletes, they were gone in no time. The instructors made a point of targeting those with impressive resumes. They didn't care who you were before you showed up. They only cared about who could survive the brutal training. For John, that was the key. He had nothing to lose. Unlike some of the others, he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone else. He was there to prove something to himself. BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, was the hardest thing he'd ever done. 6 months of mental and physical torture pushed him to his absolute limits. Most people dropped out within the first 2 months. But John hung on. You have to want to be there, he said. It's not enough to gut your way through it. The discomfort is too much. You need something in your head that keeps you going when everything else tells you to quit. After completing BUDS, John moved on to advanced training. He spent 6 more months learning the skills he'd need to actually do the job, everything from parachuting to tactical precision shooting. Even after finishing that, he still wasn't done. He spent another few months attending specialized schools to round out his qualifications before finally joining a SEAL team. For a while, it was everything he hoped it would be. He felt like he belonged. He had found his place. But then in 2014, everything changed. The moon hung low over the rugged Afghan mountains, casting faint silver light over the dusty village. It was a very dangerous place, a hostile region known for insurgent activity. John and his SEAL team had been tasked with a high-risk night raid to capture a high-value target responsible for deadly attacks on coalition forces. Every step they took was deliberate and calculated, their movements blending into the shadows. The village was eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots. As they approached the target compound, the tension was almost suffocating. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. An enemy combatant appeared from the shadows, hurling a grenade directly into their path. The blast tore through the night, a deafening explosion that sent John flying backward. His body hit the ground with a thud, pain radiating through every limb as shrapnel tore into his arms and legs. I remember the ringing in my ears, John later recalled. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I was bleeding so badly. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die right there. The scene was chaos. Shouts from his teammates, the crackle of gunfire in the distance. His team sprang into action. Despite the danger, they rushed to his side, applying tourniquets to stop the bleeding and administering life-saving care. Enemy forces were closing in, but the team didn't panic. They worked with precision, calling in an emergency evacuation. Moments later, a medevac helicopter swooped in, its rotor blades slicing through the night. Under heavy fire, John was airlifted to safety. His injuries were severe. Shrapnel had embedded itself deep in his arms and legs, causing extensive damage. He underwent multiple surgeries over the next several months to remove the fragments and repair the wounds. Back home, his family waited anxiously, unsure if John would pull through. The recovery was long and painful, both physically and emotionally. John threw everything he had into physical therapy, determined to heal and get back to his team. Even as his body began to mend, something inside him was unraveling. He missed the mission, the camaraderie, the adrenaline rush. Civilian life felt alien and empty. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was incomplete without his SEAL team. So when the chance came to deploy again, this time to Peru, on a low-risk training mission, John did not hesitate. He thought it would be an easy assignment, far removed from the chaos of war. But he was wrong. John landed in Peru with minimal preparation, expecting a routine deployment. Unlike his time in Afghanistan, this mission was meant to be simple: train local military forces and provide support. He wasn't entering a war zone this time. It was supposed to be calm, easy. But it wasn't. The moment he stepped off the plane, reality hit him like a wall. Everything was unfamiliar. The language, the people, the surroundings. His Spanish was barely conversational, and he hadn't taken the language training seriously. He struggled to navigate the airport. His bag got stuck in customs, and he couldn't explain himself to the staff. His ride, a local who didn't speak English, had no idea what John even looked like. Eventually, John made it to his destination, but the drive there was terrifying. The vehicle wound its way through a sprawling slum where makeshift homes leaned precariously on the hillsides. The streets were chaotic and filled with unfamiliar sounds: honking horns, shouting voices, the hum of distant motorcycles. John's assigned quarters were a far cry from what he expected. The room was small and constantly damp from the oppressive humidity. His clothes and sheets were perpetually wet, refusing to dry. At night, the chaotic noise from the streets outside never stopped. Dogs barked, people shouted, motorcycles roared past at all hours. Then the nightmares started. Every night it was the same dream. He was in Russia, standing on a street corner in front of a government building. Suddenly, someone grabbed him and dragged him into a car. He was taken hostage. I woke up in a panic, drenched in sweat, John said. Every night, the same dream. I started to think I was losing my mind. The isolation and stress broke something in him. Memories of Afghanistan that he had buried deep started flooding back. Moments he had tried to forget, things he had seen, things he had done, came rushing to the surface. The pressure became unbearable. John felt like he was falling apart and there was no escape. He wasn't in a combat zone, but this was just as dangerous in a different way. When John returned from Peru, the physical scars were visible, but the internal damage was far worse. His injuries and PTSD had taken a severe toll on his body and mind. It became clear that his time in the SEALs was coming to an end. In 2015, John was honorably discharged from the Navy. It was a difficult but necessary decision. He had dedicated years of his life to becoming a SEAL, and now that chapter was closing. At first, John tried to build a new life in the civilian world. He worked in corporate security and later transitioned into sales, but nothing seemed to fit. I was angry all the time, John admitted. Everything made me mad. It got to the point where no one wanted to be around me. Not my wife, not my parents. And that anger was only part of it. By this time, John had also developed a dangerous dependence on alcohol. What started as a way to numb the pain had spiraled into full-blown alcoholism. Drinking became his escape from the nightmares and memories that refused to let him go. His wife, now pregnant with their first child, tried to help him. She stood by him through it all, but John couldn't shake the storm raging inside his mind, and his drinking only made it worse, pushing her and everyone else further away. Eventually, he hit his breaking point. In 2018, after one too many nights lost to the bottle and an overwhelming sense that he was on the brink of losing everything, John decided to seek help. Therapy became his lifeline. For the first time, he started unpacking the trauma he had carried for years. It wasn't easy. Therapy didn't erase the memories or the pain, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time: perspective. He learned to confront what had happened in Afghanistan and Peru. He began to understand that his aggressive alpha mindset, which had served him so well in the SEALs, was no longer who he wanted to be. Slowly, he started to heal. But something was still missing: a career. For the first time in years, John had no mission, no team, and no clear purpose. The structure and identity the military had given him were gone. He found himself asking the same question over and over again: what now? What do I do next? And that's when John rediscovered storytelling. At first, it was just a hobby. He shared a few stories online, true crime tales that intrigued him. His voice was raw and unpolished, but people connected with it. His stories felt real, authentic, unlike anything else on the internet. Then something incredible happened. One summer afternoon, John and his family visited a local water park for a much-needed break. Storytelling was still just a hobby at that point, something fun and creative to pass the time. He had no idea what was about to happen. When we walked into the water park, my videos were doing okay, John later recalled. But when we walked out a few hours later, one of my stories had over 1 million views. Just like that, everything changed. That moment was a turning point. His audience exploded almost overnight. His stories, once seen by a handful of curious viewers, were suddenly captivating millions of people. The strange, dark, and mysterious tales that John loved to tell had struck a nerve. People couldn't get enough. Seemingly overnight, John Allen became MrBallen, the internet's most famous storyteller of the strange and unexplained. Incidentally, he had received an email from someone who had accidentally mashed his full name, John B. Allen, into MrBallen. But behind every story he tells is the story of a man who fought battles far darker than most of us will ever know. Battles that nearly broke him. Battles he ultimately won. This is the story of John Allen, the Navy SEAL who found a new mission, not on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of millions.
New episodes drop twice a week only on Heath's Story. If you'd like to support the channel, subscribe now, leave a like and a comment, and become a member by clicking below.